All right, so we're diving deep into the Baha'i faith today. Looks like you've been digging into how it tackles Christian prophecies, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
We've got some really interesting excerpts from your research here. I gotta admit, I'm kind of excited to see where this deep dive takes us.
Me too.
It's not just about, religious doctrine, though.
Right.
It's about how different faiths view, like, the big picture. Time, history, the whole shebang.
The role of prophecy itself. Yeah.
Exactly.
What I find really interesting is how the Baha'i faith kind of takes this more symbolic approach to these prophecies.
Oh, okay.
Like not so much about a literal word-for-word interpretation, but seeing them as like metaphors for spiritual transformation and how humanity evolves,
That makes sense. So, like, the second coming of Jesus for Judgment Day, that's pretty central to Christianity. How does the Baha'i faith approach that one?
Well, instead of focusing on Jesus physically coming back, they see the resurrection and return more symbolically. It's not about, like, him literally reappearing,
right?
But more about a spiritual kind of renewal and awakening,
So less of a dramatic descent from the heavens and more of a shift in, like, our spiritual understanding.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, think about how Jesus was resurrected after 3 days. It wasn't really about his body coming back, right?
Right.
It was more about a spiritual awakening.
Right.
And this is where Baha'u'llah comes in.
Okay.
He's the founder of the Baha'i faith. He said that Christ's return is a return in spirit and in his teachings.
Hold on. Can we pause there for a sec?
Sure.
We've mentioned Baha'u'llah a couple times.
Yeah.
But for folks who might not know,
Right.
can you kind of explain who he is in relation to the Baha'i faith?
Of course. Baha'u'llah, he's considered the prophet and founder of the Baha'i faith.
Okay.
He was born in Persia, which is Iran today, back in the 19th century.
Got it.
His teachings built upon, like, the foundations of other religions that came before.
Yeah.
And they focus on the oneness of humanity, the unity of all religions,
Okay.
and creating, like, a just and peaceful global society.
Got it. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So going back to the idea of Christ's return, it's not about Jesus physically coming back,
Right.
but about his message being renewed and carried forward through Baha'u'llah's teachings.
Exactly. Baha'u'llah is seen as, like, embodying the spirit of Christ's return,
Okay.
bringing a renewed message for humanity that builds upon Jesus' teaching.
That's fascinating. So it's kind of like a continuation of a spiritual lineage rather than a one-time event.
Exactly.
Which brings up another biggie, right?
Yeah.
Judgment Day.
Yeah.
What happens to that whole image in this framework?
Well, the Baha'i faith kind of shifts the perspective on Judgment Day. Instead of seeing it as one big dramatic event,
Right.
where, the good are separated from the bad, they see it more as a continuous process.
Oh, interesting.
It's about how humanity responds to God's latest messenger, who in this case is Baha'u'llah.
So let me make sure I get this. Instead of like a one-time cosmic court case,
Yeah.
we're constantly being judged.
Right.
Or I guess like our actions are always being weighed in the balance.
You got it. That's a great way to put it. This weighing, it's based on our acceptance or rejection of the new message brought by God's messenger.
Okay.
And get this, it's happening right now
Oh, wow.
as people are deciding how to respond to Baha'u'llah's call for unity and justice. They're essentially participating in this continuous judgment day.
Whoa. That's pretty intense. It really makes you think about where you fit into all of this.
Yeah.
Are we choosing to align ourselves with these messages of unity and justice, or are we kind of resisting them? It seems like there's a big emphasis on like individual choice and responsibility in the Baha'i faith.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And this idea of individual responsibility, it ties directly into the next thing we have here in your research, false prophets and Armageddon. I'm curious, what were your first thoughts on this when you were going through all this?
Well, those two concepts always kind of freaked me out, especially coming from a Christian background. The New Testament really stresses the warnings about false prophets, leading people astray.
Right.
And that final apocalyptic battle of Armageddon.
Yeah.
I was really interested to see how the Baha'i faith would tackle those.
Well, let's start with false prophets.
Okay.
The Baha'i faith sees them as individuals who might claim to have divine authority, but they're actually driven by selfish motives, by self-interest. Instead of promoting unity and love, they're all about sowing division and discord.
So it's not necessarily about denying that someone has divine inspiration,
Right.
but about looking at the message itself and whether it aligns with those core principles of unity and love.
You got it. It's about discernment.
Okay.
Being able to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
You have to recognize the true messengers of peace and unity
Right.
from those who are just manipulating and controlling people for their own gain.
That makes sense. So how does discernment relate to Armageddon? That's always been a particularly scary one for me.
Yeah.
Fire and brimstone raining down, the end of the world as we know it.
Well, this is where things get interesting. The Baha'i writings, they often describe Armageddon not as a literal, physical battle with armies and cities crumbling.
Right.
They see it as something much more symbolic.
Oh, okay.
It represents the inner and outer turmoil that humanity goes through.
So instead of a literal battlefield, it's more about this inner struggle, this clash between light and darkness, unity and disunity. That's happening within each of us.
Yes.
And within society as a whole.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the Baha'i faith, it believes this spiritual Armageddon is reaching a critical point in our current time. That's
interesting because it does feel like we're living in a time of just massive upheaval, right?
Yeah.
Uncertainty. With all the conflict and division we see, right. It's almost like we're in the middle of that spiritual battle right now.
Yeah. And this is where the Baha'i perspective gives us a different lens. It's not about predicting a literal end of the world.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that this period is like a critical juncture.
Okay.
A time with huge potential for transformation.
Okay, so we've explored how the Baha'i faith interprets these major Christian prophecies. The return of Christ, Judgment Day, false prophets, and Armageddon.
Yeah.
But here's where things get super fascinating for me. In my research, I came across this idea that Baha'i scholars believe some biblical prophecies actually point to Baha'u'llah himself.
Right.
Is that something you can elaborate on?
Absolutely. There are a few examples they point to. For instance, the name Baha'u'llah, it means the glory of God.
Oh, wow.
It connects directly to Isaiah 40.5. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
I gotta admit, that's a pretty powerful connection.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there are other examples of these prophetic links between the Bible and Baha'u'llah.
Oh, definitely. There's a passage from Revelation 3.1 that says, I will write upon him my new name.
Okay.
Baha'is interpret this as referring to Baha'u'llah,
okay,
who brought, new teachings and insights into God's will.
Okay.
It's not just a name change. It's about a whole new revelation, a new way of understanding God's message for this age.
Okay, so it's about a new chapter in God's revelation to humanity.
Right.
Are there any other biblical prophecies Baha'is see as connected to his coming?
There are even time prophecies within the books of Daniel and Revelation.
Oh, wow.
That Baha'is believe point to Baha'u'llah's coming. Like, for example, Daniel 12.11 mentions a period of 1,290 days.
Okay. What's the significance of that time period?
Baha'i interpretations suggest that if you calculate this period from the date of the Islamic revelation in 622 AD, it points to the year 1844. And what's so significant about 1844? That's the year the Bab, Baha'u'llah's forerunner, declared his mission.
The Bab. Can we get a little background on who the Bab is in relation to Baha'u'llah?
Of course. The Bab, his title means the gate. He's a central figure in the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, okay.
He prepared the way for Baha'u'llah and his teachings.
Got it.
The Bab's declaration in 1844 marked the beginning of the Baha'i era, a new cycle of prophetic revelation.
So the Bab was like a herald announcing Baha'u'llah's coming.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. What about the classic image of Jesus returning in the clouds? How does that fit in?
They see that as a metaphor for how Baha'u'llah's teachings would be understood.
Okay.
At first, they might be clouded by misunderstanding or prejudice.
Yeah.
But as people dig deeper, the truth and the significance of his message, it becomes clearer.
Ah, that's a clever interpretation.
Yeah.
So it's not a physical descent from the clouds, but about the gradual unfolding of understanding, the lifting of the veil as people encounter his teachings. This brings us to another important concept, doesn't it? The kingdom of God on earth. Christians believe in this future kingdom. Where God's will is totally reflected here on earth, does the Baha'i faith share a similar vision?
Absolutely. Baha'u'llah also proclaimed the establishment of God's kingdom. But he emphasized global unity and justice as its cornerstones.
So it's less about a supernatural realm in some far-off future,
right,
and more about building a just and unified world right here, right now.
Yes.
Based on those principles of unity and justice.
Exactly. The Baha'i teachings offer a really powerful vision for the future. It's not just about interpreting these old prophecies.
Right.
It's about actively working to create a world that reflects these principles of unity, love, and justice.
This is truly fascinating. It's incredible how the Baha'i faith takes these Christian prophecies and kind of weaves them into its own narrative of spiritual transformation. It really makes you think about these familiar concepts in a whole new light.
It really does. And it invites us to think about what would a world based on Baha'i principles actually look like, in practice.
Those are some big questions. And luckily, we have a lot more of your research to dig into. So stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore what a world transformed by Baha'i principles might actually look like.
Picking up where we left off, it's pretty amazing to think about what a world shaped by Baha'i principles might look like.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, it's not about creating some perfect utopia where everyone agrees on everything. It's more about fostering a global society that truly embraces unity and diversity.
I like that. So where do we even begin? What are the basic building blocks of that?
Well, one of the core principles is the oneness of humanity.
Okay.
The Baha'i faith teaches that we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
No matter our race, religion, nationality,
right,
or any other label we attach to ourselves.
It reminds me of that saying, we're all just human beings having a human experience.
Exactly. And when we actually grasp that idea, it can radically change everything.
Wow.
From how we treat each other to how we solve problems.
Right.
To how we see the world's challenges.
So instead of getting all caught up in our differences, we start to see that shared humanity as the foundation for building a better future.
Yes.
It sounds simple in theory, but I imagine it's a lot harder to actually put into practice.
It definitely takes conscious effort, but that's where the Baha'i teachings offer guidance. For example, another key principle is the independent investigation of truth.
Oh, interesting.
Baha'is are encouraged to question, to explore, to seek knowledge from different sources.
Yeah.
It's not about blindly accepting what you're told.
That's refreshing. It's about empowering individuals to think critically.
Right.
And do their own searching for truth. Right.
Absolutely. And this principle recognizes that truth has many facets.
Okay.
And that we can learn from lots of different perspectives.
Yeah.
It also highlights how important education is.
Knowledge is power.
Yes. But it's more than that in the Baha'i context. Education isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about developing the capacity for critical thinking and using that knowledge to contribute to a just and flourishing society.
And speaking of justice, I know that's another big principle in the Baha'i faith. But when we talk about justice, are we talking about legal systems? Or is it something broader?
It includes both.
Okay.
But it definitely goes beyond just legal frameworks.
Okay.
Social justice is a huge part of the Baha'i vision. They call for the elimination of all forms of prejudice and discrimination, whether it's based on race, gender, religion, or any other arbitrary factor.
So it's about creating a world where everyone has equal opportunities and is treated with dignity and respect no matter who they are or what they believe.
Yes. And this connects to another key principle, the equality of women and men.
Oh, okay.
Baha'u'llah taught that humanity is like a bird with two wings, men and women. And we can't truly soar unless both wings are equally developed and empowered.
That's a beautiful analogy. It's not just about fairness. Right. It's about recognizing that gender equality is essential for the progress of society as a whole.
Exactly. And it's important to see these principles as interconnected.
Right.
When you have equality, you have more justice.
Yeah.
When you have education, you have more understanding and tolerance.
Right.
When you embrace the oneness of humanity, you start breaking down the barriers that divide us.
It's like weaving together all these threads to create a beautiful tapestry of a truly just and unified world. But are these principles just theoretical ideals? Or are there actual examples of them being put into action?
That's a great question. What's inspiring is that this isn't just a theoretical vision. Baha'is all over the world are actively working to put these principles into practice in their communities.
So it's more than just talk. They're actually walking the walk.
Exactly. They're involved in so many initiatives, from promoting education and interfaith dialogue to advocating for social justice and working towards environmental sustainability.
That's incredible. It's one thing to talk about these lofty ideals. Yeah.
But it's another thing entirely to see them in action, making a real difference. But let's be realistic for a second. Building a global society based on these principles That's a pretty monumental task.
It is.
There are bound to be challenges along the way.
Of course. There will be setbacks, resistance, all sorts of obstacles to overcome. But the Baha'i faith sees this as a long-term process.
Okay.
A gradual unfolding of a new world order.
So it's not about expecting miracles overnight.
Right.
It's about this steady, persistent work of building towards this vision.
Exactly. And every act of kindness, every step towards unity, every voice raised against injustice, all of it contributes to this collective effort.
It's about creating a ripple effect of positive change.
Yes.
That's empowering. It means each of us, no matter how small we might feel, can play a part in creating a better future.
Yes.
It's inspiring, but it also makes you wonder, what do other faith traditions, like Christianity?
Yeah, think about these Baha'i interpretations. I mean, we've been talking about how the Baha'i faith views Christian prophecies.
Right.
But how do Christians themselves view the Baha'i perspective?
That's a great question. And it often leads to some really interesting conversations. As you might imagine, within Christianity, there's a whole spectrum of viewpoints on how to interpret prophecy.
Right.
Some Christians hold on to a literal interpretation of the Second Coming and Judgment Day, while others lean towards more symbolic interpretations.
So it's not like there's this one single Christian viewpoint on this?
Definitely not. Christianity is a diverse faith.
Right.
With so many denominations and theological perspectives.
Right.
Some Christians might find the Baha'i interpretations really interesting and thought-provoking, while others might disagree.
And that's okay. Right.
Of course.
It's all about respecting those different viewpoints.
Right.
And engaging in honest, open dialogue.
Exactly. And that open dialogue, that willingness to listen and learn from each other, that's a cornerstone of the Baha'i faith. They believe all religions come from the same divine source.
Okay.
And that we can all learn from each other's spiritual insights.
So it's not about trying to convert anyone or prove that one religion is right and another is wrong. It's about building bridges of understanding rather than walls of division.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's through these kinds of respectful conversations, these genuine attempts to understand each other, that we can start to find common ground and work together towards a more peaceful and unified world.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from symbolic interpretations of Christian prophecies to the vision of a world transformed by Baha'i principles. Do you have like a final thought-provoking takeaway for our listener?
Here's something to think about. If the Baha'i view of a continuous judgment day is true, and we're always being weighed based on our actions, what choices are we making today that are contributing to either unity or division? Are we building bridges or are we burning them?
That's a powerful question. It really makes you think about the impact of our everyday choices. It really does make you stop and think, it's not about waiting for some big event in the future. It's about the little choices we're making right now.
No, totally.
Choosing unity instead of division, choosing love over hate, choosing understanding instead of judgment. It all matters.
It all adds up.
Yeah. It feels like a lot of responsibility, doesn't it?
It does.
Knowing that we each have this power to make the world a better place, but also that, like, the responsibility to actually do it is on us.
It's a huge responsibility, but I think that's also what gives our lives meaning.
Yeah.
You know, it's realizing we're not just watching this whole human history thing play out. We're a part of it.
Right.
We all have a role to play.
We're all part of the story, and the choices we make, they determine how that story goes. It's like we all have a paintbrush, and we're adding our own strokes to the big picture of, like, human civilization.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It reminds us that even the tiniest acts of kindness and compassion, they could have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
They create positive change that goes way beyond ourselves.
So it's not about waiting for some huge world-changing event to fix everything.
Right.
It's about focusing on what we can do right now to make a difference, no matter how small it might seem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It all starts with changing our own hearts and minds, and then letting that change spread out into the world.
It's like that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yes. Exactly. And the Baha'i faith, it gives us this framework, this set of guiding principles to help us make that change. Those principles can guide us toward a more just, unified, and peaceful world.
This has been incredible, wouldn't you say? Exploring these deep connections between the Baha'i faith and Christian prophecies.
It has been.
Uncovering new layers of meaning and understanding.
It's been a privilege to share these insights with you. Hopefully it sparks some curiosity. and maybe even inspired you to explore the Baha'i faith a bit more on your own. There's always something new to discover.
I know, I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. This is the kind of stuff that really sticks with you, that makes you see the world a little differently.
Remember, this quest for knowledge and understanding, it's a lifelong journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking.
Yeah.
And you'll keep finding those amazing truths along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. As always, a huge thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us on this amazing journey. Keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and may your actions always reflect those principles of unity and love. Until next time, happy diving.